Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Tanya Andricks, and I'm the CEO of Crossing Healthcare Indicator. At Crossing Healthcare, we work really hard to understand the health and wellness needs of our community and then find ways to provide access to treatment and services for everybody in the community to address those health and wellness needs. So here we are beginning a new year. It's 2021, and we're still in the midst of a global pandemic. And so we believe that a focus on mental wellness might be a really good way to start this new year and might be a really important way for us to reach out to our community and really help take us home through this pandemic and get us through it in a better way. So today, I'm excited because I'm joined by a dear friend and an expert in the field of mental health named Mary Garrison to talk about depression. Hello, Mary.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining. If you would indulge me for just a minute, Mary, other than being a dear friend of mine, Mary holds a whole lot of credentials that make her the perfect person to have this conversation with me today. Mary is a licensed clinical social worker and has been working in this field for more than 30 years. She is a professor of social work at Millikin University. And beyond that, Mary has dedicated so much of her time and service to Decatur and Macon County. She is the president of the Good Samaritan Inn board. She has worked on other boards, including Webster Cantrell Hall, the Continuum of Care Board, and really has worked tirelessly to support folks who are impoverished, who struggle with mental health, who might be living with homelessness. And so she really puts her money where her mouth is. Then, if that's not enough, she has been awarded Social Worker of the Year multiple times from many different organizations because of her tireless dedication. And finally, because she has also happened to have written a book about depression, she is going to talk to us today. So Mary, you wrote a wonderful book that you gave to me several years ago that has helped me a lot. It's called Your Playbook for Beating Depression, Essential Strategies for Managing and Living with Depression. Thank you, first of all, for joining me, and thank you for being a local person that can help us, that has so many wonderful credentials that can really help us and guide us through this topic. So you wrote this book about depression. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me why you wrote the book and what impact you hoped it would have, first and foremost?
Sure. I never thought that I'd be writing a book, and I actually met, in 2011, a pretty famous gentleman in the tennis world. His name is Cliff Ritchie. And I was a keynote speaker at a conference, and he was there speaking about his own book. And it actually was a state nominee conference in Montana, so having to do with mental health. And he and I met and started talking, and we literally spent the next 3 days together. He shared his story, which is his first book, about living with depression, having substance use issues. He won the Davis Cup back in the day. I mean, he was a very top-rated athlete and really shared those struggles. And so we're literally friends to the end here. He just turned 71 last week, New Year's, and he approached me and said, "You know what? I think I want to do another book, and I want to do it more of a clinical piece. So people have heard my story, but now we need kind of, if you will, a toolkit, and something that's, just you can absorb it in an easy way. I talk about being a problem solver, and I just let's get to it. Let's do what we need to do." And so we were very deliberate about these strategies that we put forth in this book. So the neat piece of this is, one, I got to do this with my good friend, but he shares his story. We talk about ways, and we kind of really get into depression to understand what it is. We understand what stigma is. We talk about what substance use is and the impact. We even talk about suicide. Those are all things we need to talk about, and we need to be talking about them pretty routinely. And it feels better to read the book knowing that there's someone along with you like Cliff who's experiencing it, has experienced it, and that really, I think, helps the reader. So the goal was to get this book into people's hands, whether you yourself are experiencing mental health concerns, or you have family members you just don't know where to turn or turn them. It's literally, toolkit, just here, take this, and you can, at the end of every chapter, you actually have a scorecard. And you get to write down kind of things that you need to be doing. And you can start at any place in the book, really, if you need to. If you're really struggling with substance use, you can start there. If suicide is something that is really on your mind, or your family members, you can start there. So my hope is to change at least one life.
Well, I'm certain you already have done that. What year did this book come out?
2017.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
Now, when you wrote the book in 2017, you of course had no way to know that 2020 would even happen, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so here we are. We're now in early 2021 as we record this, but we're all coming through this pandemic. And one thing that we know is that mental health issues have really skyrocketed over the course of the last 10 months. You know, this pandemic has been so tough for most everyone. I honestly, Mary, have to tell you, I don't know anyone that's been unscathed by this, whether it's been through a loss of a loved one, personal illness, or the economic impact that this has had. You know, this has really been a struggle and a challenging year. So when you wrote this, you had no way to know that we would be dealing with COVID-19. But my question to you is this: how can the information that you sort of lay out in this book help us as we navigate this pandemic?
Well, I hope that when I think about the book, one of the things I do in the beginning is we introduce stigma. And so, I try to look at things positively. And when I look at the pandemic, there's been a lot of negatives, right? A lot of hurt, a lot of pain. But one of the things it's done is it's really brought mental health to the forefront, like this mental wellness. We all need to have that. We need it before the pandemic, and we need it now. And so my hope is that maybe we relook at, why do we stigmatize individuals who may be experiencing depression and anxiety? There are so many people that do. There's over 17 million people who experience depression in the past year. And that's prior COVID. And that's just increased. And so one of the things that I think you can read through the book and look at, everything that's in the book applies now. And unfortunately, the pandemic has just enhanced the concerns, right? Depression rates have increased. The rate of suicide has increased. Substance use has increased, because we've never dealt with a pandemic before. And like you said, not only the loss of loved ones, the economic loss, those who are having to quarantine and shelter in place in difficult relationships, all of those things. And we are all experiencing this together. And normally we might be the one person experiencing that we think is experiencing it. So I think the book could really help someone normalize that this is okay. Let's reduce that stigma, and that it makes a lot of sense that during this difficult time, there's going to be a lot of anxiety, and there could be some signs of depression, and we need to manage that. And I hope that we keep that stigma away after the pandemic.
I would agree with you. And I think that once we head down this path and sort of destigmatize things, that usually sticks, right? And so I think that has been a silver lining to all this.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to make sure that the folks listening today know that we will include in the links on this program ways that you can find this book. It's really easy to access. You can get it on Amazon and other places. So I know that it will be easy for folks to access. And so we will make sure that everyone listening today has that information. And again, thanks for joining me today. I'm talking to Mary Garrison, and we're talking about depression. One of the things that I also want to really start to break down is this question is, how do you know whether this is just the pandemic blues,
Mm-hmm.
or if this is truly clinical depression? What's, from your perspective, how can we discern that to start with? And then a follow-up question to that, not to make this difficult, but somebody listening today might not be the person who's experiencing depression. They might be the significant other, the family member, or the loved one. And so I think it's twofold. It's, how can I tell personally what's sort of the pandemic blues that I need to maybe do XYZ for? And what is a little more concerning and might be clinical depression? And how can I tell that personally? But then how can I tell that for the people that are around me, or the people that I love? Is that something we could talk about?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think all of us have probably said, "Oh, I'm depressed. I'm just feeling so depressed today." And that's a word that I think is misunderstood, right? So we all have feelings that go up and down at times. Sometimes we can have really low lows. There's reasons for that. One, we could have had a loss, obviously, all the things that we're experiencing now. But when we talk about clinical depression, this is where it starts to impact our life, where people who experience this cannot get out of bed at times. And I think that's really hard for people to understand, because we always say, well, just, you're fine. Get up. What, you look fine. Get up and get out of bed. And that's one of the hardest things for someone to say to someone who experiences depression, because you want to, and you know that you're really struggling, but you just can't. So depression is about a chemical imbalance in your brain and how we need to manage that. But there's also environmental factors. And so that's why potentially during the pandemic, our whole environment changed. And now we might be experiencing more symptoms. So again, you could see a change in your daily routine. You maybe every day you're staying in bed longer and longer, and now you just can't get up. You see no reason to get up. There's nothing that can motivate you. You might have a change in eating. You might eat more, you might eat less. You might sleep more, you might sleep less. You might find yourself agitated. You might find yourself a little anxious, because depression and anxiety really correlate together a lot. And that's what we found in the pandemic, that there's a strong correlation, but usually we see those together. And so once you see your routine changing, and if you can see that and are aware of that, that's a time maybe to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? Is this more, am I just really struggling with the pandemic right now, or in my situation? Or is there more to this? How long has my sadness been? How long have I been really struggling? I mean, you truly kind of, at a high level of clinical depression, really kind of immobilize and just stop. The functioning is very, very difficult. The other piece that might be a sign is if you're doing things to try to combat those feelings. So individuals might be doing something we call self-medicating. They might be using a substance to make themselves feel better. Maybe that's not anything they've done before, and so they're not used. What am I feeling? What's going on? I can't really put a finger on this. So maybe it feels really good to have an extra drink and to do this, but then that's actually really troublesome and could lead to a lot of problems. And we can talk further about that.
I want to interrupt you
Yeah.
real quickly, because one of the things that I've sort of seen in popular culture, and certainly on social media, has been this sort of mommy wine culture. And so one of the things I've really noticed that kind of bothers me a little bit is, as moms are talking about the challenges of e-learning and being home with the kids, and I'm having a glass of wine in my coffee mug by 2 p.m. And so to some degree, I think that behavior has maybe been normalized. But what I think I hear you say is, if that's not been your norm, and you're finding yourself needing to have a glass of wine by 2 p.m. to get through your day, that might be, am I hearing you say that might be a cause for pause?
Absolutely. Again, a change in that behavior. If you're looking for something outside there to help you, that is not therapy, that is not a prescribed medication, that can be really problematic. And even if you have engaged in maybe drinking in the afternoon, but that gets worse, or you continue to see that, right? So that can be problematic itself. And I do think there's a culture out there that has normalized that get through a hard day and I can have this and this and this. And so of course I should feel better after that. There's a lot of TV shows out there, some I really like, but at the end of their day in their offices, they're having drinks, right? And you think, oh my gosh, what is this saying to everyone, that this is how I have to get through that? Right. And so we want to make sure that you're looking at yourself and understanding what is different about my behavior, maybe tracking that too. But again, the hard part is when you're so in it and you're experiencing those symptoms, it's really hard to be the one to say, oh, I think I have a problem, because I might have, I probably would have done that sooner, right? So you're really caught, I think, when you've kind of gotten to that point. But you asked about caregivers and friends, and that's where we really need to look out for each other and begin to note if there's changes in our friends and family and those behaviors, and just ask if people are okay, but go beyond that. Because I can say, yes, I'm okay. Tanya, I can tell you that and be like, I'm fine, and I'm really not.
Right.
But I think you need to say, well, what does okay mean? How are, what are you feeling? Like, tell me, are you, let folks have a conversation and be upfront about, this is awful, I'm not liking it, and be safe to share that. I think we also all have, with social media and just the world we live in, we all have this persona we need to put forth. And it's really hard to say, I'm not doing okay. And I've heard through the pandemic to say it's okay to not be okay. And I like that, but we need to really understand what that means.
Mary, what might be good ways, what might be a good script? So say I've got a dear friend, or maybe it's my significant other that I live with, and I'm noticing these changes towards depression. I'm noticing behavior changes. They're in the throes of it. And so the last thing I want to do is point it out, because I'm afraid I'm going to make it worse, right? And so what are words? What's an example of words that you can say that you think might be beneficial to begin the dialogue?
I would say that pointing it out is exactly what you need to do, and being quite upfront in a kind and supportive way. My guess is the person that you're seeing struggling wants you to say what is going on. They may feel embarrassed to say they can't handle it. Look at you, you're handling the pandemic fine, you're doing this okay, but I can't handle it. And I have all the resources, but I still can't handle it, right? So I want to reduce that barrier to someone, and I want to make it okay to say, I've been struggling a lot, and I wonder if you're struggling too. And use the words depression. It's okay. And ask what kinds of feelings someone is having. A lot of people also think, like related to suicide, that if you bring the word up, you're going to put that in someone's mind. And that's not the case. Someone who is experiencing thoughts of suicide are already doing that before you have the conversation. My job is to normalize that it's okay. It's scary to have those thoughts, I'm sure, but there's nothing wrong with you having those, and you want to reach out, and I want to tell you it's okay. I don't want you to have them, if that makes sense. Right. But there's nothing wrong with you. You're a lot of people are. And so I think that's really important, is to hit it head on, and then but to take the response from them and pace that. How are they responding? If they're like, oh, Tanya, thank you, wow, that made me really feel good to be able to just say it. Or they may push back, and then that's where you got to keep at it. And you can take it from a frame of maybe sharing if you're experiencing it, or that someone who has. And that's what the book does a lot, I think. And the book is actually a good way to introduce that. Like, privately take this if you want and read it. And someone would say, I don't want to. Well, okay, but it's there, and they might explore that and then be willing to have the conversation. Definitely.
Thank you, Mary. I think that, what I hear you saying is sort of twofold. Is you've got to watch for patterns in both yourself and those around you, those that you love, those that you're checking up on, and watch for changes in behavior that might indicate there's a problem. But then the second thing is first of all, if this is yourself, don't be afraid to raise this to someone. Don't be afraid to say the words, I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling feelings of suicide. I'm feeling like I can't get up in the morning. And so if it's you, don't be afraid to verbalize those things. But then what I'm hearing you say, which I think for me is even a challenge, is if it's somebody you love, don't be afraid to point it out with loving kindness, of course.
Absolutely.
But I think that many of us fear that pointing it out somehow makes it worse. And I hear you saying the opposite is the case. And so maybe the takeaway from this first part of our conversation is just that, is that A, it's really important to notice it and identify it. And B, it's really important to shine a light on it.
I would agree with you. And what it does is it continues the stigma if we don't talk about it. And the other piece I will just quickly say is that it's important too that whatever, if I'm talking to a family member or friend, whatever they say is okay. I shouldn't correct their feelings, put other words in, tell them it's going to be okay. I can tell them I'm going to be there to support them, whatever that looks like, because I don't know what their okay is. So it's really important to allow someone to have control, as much control over the situation they can, and let them ask you for what they need. You let them know you're there.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because I think so much of our culture is just to wrap things up with a pretty bow. And so it's really uncomfortable if you're not used to having difficult conversations with our loved ones. It's sometimes the closer the person is, the more uncomfortable it is to not be able to, quote, fix it.
Absolutely.
And so I think the words that often come out of our mouth is it's going to be okay, because we desperately want it to be okay for the person. But I think what I hear you saying is maybe a better way to say that is I'm right here with you through this.
Absolutely.
Because you know what? We can't make it go away, because what we've all learned in 2020 is we have zero control over this global pandemic, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very much so.
Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. The goal for these mental wellness conversations is really about shining a light on current issues that affect us all here in our local community, and then providing practical information on how we go about addressing that. So in this part one of the conversation about depression, we really did just want to talk about what's it look like and how do we raise awareness of that. When you join me back for part two, we're going to talk about, okay, we've pointed it out. Right. Now what do we do? What's treatment look like? What do all those things look like? So Mary, thank you again. Mary Garrison, professor of social work at Millikin, but most importantly, the author of the wonderful book, Your Playbook for Beating Depression, Essential Strategies for Managing and Living with Depression, which is absolutely very relevant to us today as we navigate this pandemic. And again, thank you for joining me.